In early 2021, Kyle Kulinski received a question about veganism that I wanted to discuss. Let me preface by saying that I in no way intend to attack Kyle as a person for his answer here. I will merely react and respond to the subject matter of what he said, the substance of his answer, and what I believe and understand about the topic in general. So without further ado, here is Kyle Kulinski reacting to a question he received on his stream, Secular Talking Smack, about animal agriculture and a left-wing hypocrisy towards bacon.
Animal agriculture is a giant contributor to climate change, but not many lefties promote a plant-based lifestyle. Why? Hypocrisy for bacon? So here's what I've always said about like food. And it's funny because I got attacked for this when you would think that I wouldn't get attacked for it because I'm giving these people credit in a way. But I always said I see from a moral perspective why veganism is popular. Because yeah, the idea is I don't want to have any animal products, so no animals are harmed with anything I eat. I see why from a moral perspective that's superior. It's like, yeah, no, I'm living in a way where no living thing is harmed. You're not causing pain to anything, right? Like, I see how that's morally superior. I do, and I agree with that. But in terms of me personally, I'm a product of my culture like anybody else. And I've been raised eating meat, and so I just never really never trying to get off meat. I've only ever done a few diets in my lifetime. I did the keto diet one time, and it worked. It really melts weight off you. But like very few times in my life have I even dieted. So I just kind of eat whatever the hell's in front of me. I'm such a product of my own environment. So yes, I guess what I would say to you is, if you want to promote and argue for a plant-based lifestyle and get more lefties on board, then do exactly that. But I would also say you're probably not going to win people over with like that standoffish, aggressive tone that a lot of vegans seem to take. I've noticed that quite a bit. There's a lot of angry chastising, but it's like, listen, you're up against the tides of all of culture and society. So you got to try to find a way to fight back against that in a way that works. And I don't think like chastising people is going to get that done. So, but if you call me a hypocrite because I understand that not eating animals is morally better, but I eat animals, call me a hypocrite. I'm definitely a hypocrite. And yes, a hypocrite for bacon as well, because I do like bacon.
So the question was, animal agriculture is a giant contributor to climate change, but not many lefties promote a plant-based lifestyle. Why? Hypocrisy for bacon? And Kyle's answer basically boiled down to, he understands the moral perspective on not harming animals, but he's a product of his culture and environment. Okay, now, what Kyle just displayed here is his Carnism, and again, that's not an attack on him. So what I want to start off by saying is that he isn't responding to the main point of the question, which was animal agriculture is a giant contributor to climate change, because it's the first thing that's mentioned, and it seems to be at the forefront of the questioner's concerns, and not even the morality of being vegan, which is an enormous conversation to have. But he ignored the basis of the question, and I don't think he actually did it on purpose. I think it didn't even occur to him. Kyle states that he's a product of his environment and culture, which, yes, I agree with. We're all products of our environment. But I think that's a cop-out answer. Everybody is a product of their culture to some degree, but this argument he makes seems to suggest that because we are affected by our environment, then somehow our own responsibility for our food choices is non-existent. Like if you grew up around abusive people, then it's only natural that you might become an abusive person. And I know if you asked him, do you think that? He would say, no, that sounds silly. Everyone is different, but responsible for their own actions. But the consequence of his answer here about being a product of our environment is that, because we're molded by our society and culture, then it's not really on us to change our own behaviors. This is a defensive statement because, yes, we are all affected by our society to an extent, but based on our own research and knowledge, we can develop a better understanding of something and make different choices to create a change, not only for ourselves, but for our environment as well. And in learning more about a subject, the more we can make well-informed decisions. You wouldn't grow up in an abusive environment and expect society at large to tolerate horrendous behavior and allow you to go on assaulting people just because you were assaulted before. Once you are old enough to make your own decisions, you are responsible for them and the repercussions which they're attached to. Whether they be a good choice or a bad choice, we can still make conscious, educated choices based on what we've learned and researched. It just really matters how willing you are to change a behavior for yourself and others. And frankly, dealing with your carnism is likely to cause an instance of cognitive dissonance, a defensive behavior based on priorly held beliefs. I really wish Kyle would research who Melanie Joy is, because what he's displaying with his answer is his carnism, and again, that's not a personal attack. What Kyle's right about, but probably doesn't even realize how correct he is about this, is being a product of the culture. That is exactly what carnism is, a conditioning of society to normalize certain behaviors. It affects all kinds of institutions, such as political and educational, and conditions us from a young age to accept how things are. A cow is a cow and is less than a human because society has dictated that it is. Pigs and chickens are of less value because we believe they are, and all pigs and chickens are the same. We mass produce animals for meat to feed an enormous population because we already do it this way, and why would we do it any way differently? We factory farm animals because that's how we already do it. So why would we stop or change our behavior? Well, merely the idea of eating vegan strictly for morality purposes doesn't always seem to alter the behavior of others. If there was a focal point to criticize our eating and other related habits, like a word, carnism, then maybe we might reconsider our behavior that we were convinced was normal for so long. That's exactly what Melanie Joy does with the definition of carnism, dismantling the idea of how that's how things are and how are we going to change it. So in my opinion, the response, I'm a product of my culture, is kind of a low-grade justification and rationalization. This is directly from Wikipedia. Carnism is a concept used in discussions of humanity's relation to other animals, defined as a prevailing ideology in which people support the use and consumption of animal products, especially meat. Carnism is presented as a dominant belief system supported by a variety of defense mechanisms and mostly unchallenged assumptions. The term carnism was coined by social psychologist and author Melanie Joy in 2001 and popularized by her book Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. So I'd like to see Kyle look more into and try to learn more about who Melanie Joy is. On her website, a quote from Marianne Williamson, who I know Kyle loves and might even consider voting for her in 2024 if she decides to run. He even interviewed Marianne on his new show with Crystal Kyle and Friends, and had her on for the Julian Assange extradition stream recently, where they interviewed many experts about that, which I highly recommend you watch. Marianne Williamson says, Melanie Joy's work sheds light on the way we think about oppression and social justice. Another quote on Melanie's site by Michael Greger, who's an American physician, author, professional speaker on public health issues, states, Melanie Joy's work is groundbreaking. She brilliantly explains why people resist information that would help them make more healthful choices and how they can overcome this. I know how much Kyle appreciates psychology. So do I. And I believe Melanie Joy has structured a tangible argument against our eating habits and lifestyles we were conditioned to believe were normal using the criteria of carnism. I think it would help him come to a greater understanding of his food-related behaviors. And even if he does understand his decisions, is it more a matter of laziness or fear as to why he won't choose to make a change? One last point I'll make on this, and actually my wife brought it up. Kyle's position on the death penalty is anti on principle. The fact that 4% of the time innocent people are put to death, we can't make sure that we never kill people who aren't guilty. If Kyle is against the death penalty on principle, then why isn't he against supporting animal agriculture when a high percentage of the time animals are being abused with enormous barbarity? If he's unaware of the extent of the abuse which occurs, he would need to expose himself to enough of it to fully understand it. It's one thing knowing that sometimes animals are mistreated. It's another letting yourself consume enough of the visceral reality which actually occurs to come to a full appreciation of it. Back to the main point. Animal agriculture contributes to climate change. This, in my opinion, is the most important aspect of veganism, even more so than the reality standpoint of trying to minimize suffering. Which I agree with the harm reduction aspect, but to me, it's not as germane as to the health of the planet. U.S. agriculture can pump an estimated 700 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere a year, just as it did alone in 2018. 12% of that was CO2, about 36% of it was methane, and 51% of it was nitrous oxide, all greenhouse gases. Granted, methane has a smaller half-life than CO2, but it's still not good to breathe and that shit accumulates. See what I did there? The Amazon rainforest in South America has been burned down to make room for more livestock companies to keep up with the demand for meat for a growing population. South American cattle ranching accounts for about 80% of current deforestation rates. That, of course, is endangering the native wildlife of the Amazon and wiping out species in the process. Brazil is home to approximately 200 million head of cattle, and they are the largest exporter of meat in the world, and sent 1.64 million tons of it to markets in China, Egypt, and the European Union in 2018, according to the Brazilian Beef Exporters Association. Since the 1960s, about 15% of the Amazon rainforest has been removed through agricultural practices, and that number will continue to grow until we cease animal production. It takes about 1,800 gallons of clean water to produce 1 pound of beef. Pork takes about 580 gallons. So if a male cow weighs about 2,400, a full-grown male cow weighs about 2,400 pounds. So it takes roughly 4,300,000 gallons of water to grow a cow. And human people in Flint, Michigan still need to worry about where their clean fucking water is coming from. One other vital piece of information I think is pertinent is that livestock, such as cows, aren't eating their own natural diet. They're eating corn, which is not how a cow thrives. So when you're eating factory farmed meat, you're eating an animal that wasn't even eating a proper diet for it to stay healthy. They're grazing animals. They eat grass, not corn. But that is more of a money issue rather than what the farming industry thinks is good for the animal. What they think is best for the cow. Not a very humane or healthy diet for us. There's a myriad of reasons why the agriculture industry is such a detriment to the environment that if I went over all of it, I would be here all day and end up editing this video for a straight month. And it would be hours long. So in short, the agriculture industry is a major contributor to climate change, and a plethora of information and evidence can be found by doing a sufficient amount of research. I recommend the documentaries Food Incorporated and Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret, to start with if you want to learn more. Oh, but that's not all. I'd like to discuss the health aspects of veganism versus the commonality of health conditions related to eating meat, dairy, and eggs. The standard Western diet is riddled with a slew of diet-related illnesses, even cancer, and this is not hyperbole. Another 2 documentaries, which I also highly recommend, Food Choices and Forks Over Knives, features data provided by the China Study. Now, the China Study was published in the United States in January 2005. It was co-authored by both T. Colin Campbell and Thomas M. Campbell II. Dr. Colin Campbell is the Jacob Gould Sherman Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry at Cornell University. Holy crap, this one hell of a title. And he has received more than 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding and wrote over 300 research papers. Now his son, Thomas M. Campbell II, is an MD and a medical director of the University of Rochester Weight Management and Lifestyle Center at Highland Hospital. He has a clinical practice where he works with groups of individuals to lose weight and prevent and treat illnesses through diet and lifestyle. He also helps to run a research program to better understand the effects of nutrition on diagnosed diseases. Both Thomas and Colin are co-authors of the China study. They also wrote 2 other books, The Low Carb Fraud and Whole. T. Colin Campbell has been featured in several documentaries, including Forks Over Knives, Food Matters, and Plant Pure Nation, which Plant Pure Nation focuses more on T. Colin and his family's experiences with plant-based diets and trying to help the small town of Mabane, Kentucky, where they face up against agribusiness lobbyists in court for a bill which inevitably got struck down, and the bill was to basically just admit the scientific findings that the standard Western diet has on our health. All it did was acknowledge the scientific data, and they couldn't even do that. A very fascinating documentary. It showcases some of the politics surrounding big agro companies. Go watch it somewhere. T. Cullen was in another great documentary, Food Matters, which, of course, I suggest looking up. He is also the founder of T. Colin Campbell's Center for Nutrition Studies. Now, more about the China study. The conclusion is that animal-based foods increase tumor development, while plant-based foods decrease it. But that's oversimplifying it. The China study examines the links between the consumption of animal products, including dairy and eggs, and chronic illnesses like coronary heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and bowel cancer. The authors concluded that people who eat a predominantly whole food vegan diet, avoiding animal products as a source of nutrition, including beef, pork, poultry, fish, eggs, cheese, and milk, reducing their intake of processed foods and refined carbohydrates, will escape, reduce, or even reverse the development of these diseases. They recommend in the book that you receive adequate sunshine exposure for vitamin D or take dietary supplements to maintain these levels, and it's also fair to state that they suggest taking vitamin B12 for vegans. Now, technically B12 is vegan. It's essentially bacteria found on plants that herbivores eat, and when they digest it, it proliferates and forms as part of their gut flora, producing vitamin B12 internally. There are ethically sourced supplements of B12 and non-ethical sources. You just need to know what to look for. Some people think vegans don't get any B12 from the diet, but that's untrue because there are several plant foods which contain naturally occurring B12, such as mushrooms, soy, products made from it like tofu or tempeh, seaweed, algae, nutritional yeast, and other foods which are fortified with B12 like plant milks and cereals. So vegans are covered when it comes to our B12 vitamin intake. Furthermore, they criticize low-carb diets such as the Atkins diet, which includes restrictions on the percentage of calories derived from carbohydrates. The authors are very critical of reductionist approaches to the study of nutrition, where certain nutrients are being blamed for diseases, as opposed to actually studying the patterns of nutrition and the interactions between nutrients. For clarity, I will summarize the first 3 chapters of the China study. Basically, the authors describe the worsening epidemics of cancer, obesity, and diabetes here in the US. They state the medical system is the 3rd highest cause of death. It is also the most expensive in the world and quickly becoming more and more expensive. I'll say right now, that's just another argument for Medicare for all. If we won't change our food choices, we're only going to die quicker and end up with higher medical and pharmaceutical bills. We need Medicare for all, and we need it now. And here is another good reason for it. Anyway, they explain how good nutrition can solve many of these problems and how the American public is getting a lot of contradictory advice on nutrition from some authoritative sources and how we're being harmed by these diet fads. Their recommendation is to avoid animal-based foods and eat whole plant-based foods. Chapter 2 is about protein. They examine the history of protein research and the emphasis on protein, in so many dietary recommendations. Particularly animal protein is described as high quality because it comes close to matching the balance of amino acids in human protein. Vegetarians believe they carefully need to match ingredients to get all the amino acids they need, but the authors state that the human body can synthesize all the amino acids it needs from a varied enough plant diet. Colin Campbell describes how he began with a traditional view of the importance of protein, but in committing enough research, changed his mind, coming to a different conclusion. A study of nutrition in the Philippines found that fungus in peanuts and corn was producing aflatoxin, a potent carcinogen, and the highest rates of liver cancer were in affluent families where the children had abundant protein. Colin also found a research paper from India that showed a strong association between protein consumption and liver cancer in rats. The rest of the chapter described topics in research methodology, including the difference between correlation and causation, statistical significance, mechanisms of action, and meta-analysis. And finally, we get to what I think is the most important topic: cancer and how to turn it off. They describe the deep public interest in carcinogenic foods. An example is nitrates, chemicals that are found in food like hot dogs, bacon, Kyle's hypocrisy food, and canned meats. In the rats, these were anticipated to be human carcinogens based on laboratory studies with rats. The authors emphasize that these studies exposed the rats to enormous quantities of nitrates, and the effect on cancer rates was modest, in one study rising from 5% to 10%. Colin Campbell then described coming across an Indian research paper in which lowering the intake of protein reduced cancer from 100% to 0%. They then discussed the relationship between diet and cancer. Campbell describes 3 stages of cancer. The initiation phase. A carcinogen enters a cell and is metabolized by an enzyme called mixed function oxidase, MFO. The products of this metabolism are mostly safe, but there are some toxic byproducts which can damage our DNA. In the promotion phase, tumors grow from tiny clusters of cells called foci. This phase is reversible depending on the balance between promoters that feed growth and anti-promoters that inhibit it. Finally, progression is the spreading of the cancer from its source to neighboring parts of the body, at which point it is considered malignant. Rats were fed aflatoxin and varying amounts of protein between 5% and 20% of their diet. A low-protein diet greatly reduced tumor initiation by several mechanisms. I also want to add that a population of several hundred rats were studied over 100 weeks, close to the normal lifetime of a rat. At the end of this period, all rats on the 5% diet were alive and active with sleek hair coats, while those on the 20% diet were dead. The same results were obtained in studies of liver cancer and diet in mice. Rats were fed casein, which is the dominant protein in cow's milk. However, plant-based proteins such as gluten from wheat and soy protein did not promote the growth of tumors, even at higher levels. So as I stated, the in conclusion is that animal-based foods increase tumor development, while plant-based foods decrease it. However, it is fair to state that the 3rd chapter ends by noting that the experiments involving rats don't provide quantitative information on the effects of diets on humans. The book goes on to explain that in the 4th chapter. Now, I've provided a basket load there, and I know it's a lot to take in at once, so I really recommend people go read or research what they can on the China study and look up those documentaries because they're very informative. If you can't find or afford any streaming services with those docs on there, go to your local library. They might have them for free. I will be leaving links to all of my sources in the description, so go check them out and don't just take my word for anything. I'm not a scientist, but I listen to the scientists. Now, I want to say one other thing regarding sugar. I know how much Kyle and Corin love their sugar, love their candy. They always talk about wanting to eat healthier, but you've seen them eating Starburst or whatever and talk about the candies they love. Believe me, I love candy too. As a vegan, I can still eat candy. It's organic sugar because traditional granulated sugar gets bleached in a filtering process where they used leftover livestock bone char to give it that white crystallized look, but it's completely unnecessary. After a year of choosing to be vegan back in 2015, I didn't even know this about traditional sugar, so I started reading my labels every time before buying. I try to buy organic because organic means it's not refined or has anything unnecessary added to it. Vegan sugar still tastes like sugar. It's better for you. Having too much sugar in general is bad for you, but our bodies need sugar. I still have sugar and it's vegan, but it's more about moderation. Moving on. Another thing Kyle mentioned was you won't win a lot of people over with a standoffish, aggressive tone that some vegans take. I agree with this. I hate this guilt-trippy tactic that some vegans do. A smaller percentage, but they're a vocal minority. You should not judge an entire group by a small few who are loud and obnoxious. I would think even Kyle knows this. Listen carefully to the ones who speak easy and are rational. This abrasive approach that some vegans take, I understand, is very off-putting to non-vegans, and it does not change your minds or behaviors. It just drives people away, and it makes them defensive. A person put in a defensive position is not going to relent from their strongly held beliefs. People like Vegan Gains or Gary Yourofsky. Now, I have a lot of respect for Gary Yourofsky and things he's accomplished with his activism. Like liberating minks from a fur farm in Canada. He was banned from entering the UK and deemed a terrorist by the farming industry because of his activism, which is completely unacceptable and hilarious. The fact that you can be called an eco-terrorist for sabotaging the destructive behaviors of some companies. I don't care about the hundreds of thousands of dollars you lost because your company's practices are destructive and unethical, and not only to animals, but to the environment as well. And if it is better for the environment for a few people to go outside of the law to prevent or demolish the horrendous practices of some companies, then more power to them. I give them credit. I like to point to the example of the Native American protests at Standing Rock, who didn't want a damn oil pipeline going through land which was supposed to be dedicated to the native tribes. They are awesome people. The fact that he gets labeled a terrorist is ludicrous, because terrorism is defined as violence or murder due to a religious or political belief. I do not consider vandalism or theft of property to be equal to terrorism. Getting labeled a terrorist is pretty common among people who attempt animal liberation. It's a very ironic thing the farming companies like to do. However, while I deeply appreciate that Gary gives proactive lectures and exposes the brutal truths of factory farming and animal welfare, Gary Yourofsky has a tendency to act holier than thou, and you can't tell him anything. He's going to tell you everything, and nobody likes that fucking attitude. He's got videos where he was interviewed calling the interviewer an animal abuser in the title. He said shit like, "I hope every woman ensconced in fur endures a rape so horrible that it leaves scars." He's come out since clarifying his statement, saying, "Oh, well, I want the same thing to happen to rapists and shit." You wouldn't need to clarify your statement had you not said something so ludicrously offensive to begin with. He's also called black people hypocrites and wonders why others call him racist. Try to be less condescending, maybe? Just try not being a self-righteous dickhead. I'm not saying you can't be right. Just structure yourself and your behavior in a way where you don't come off as a total fucking asshole and put people off to the concept of veganism in the first place. Vegan Gains is another example of a militant vegan, but to me, he seems like more of a clout chaser. I can forgive dark humor, and he's made me chuckle a couple of times, but when you say things along the line of, "We need to force people to be vegan," which you can't do that's authoritarian, then it's no wonder why people look their nose up at you, or just stop listening. When someone feels backed into a corner, their best defense is to go on the offense. It doesn't always produce the healthiest conversations. And there's a conversation to be had about how effective inflammatory comments in favor of veganism are compared to easy-spoken comments made with a sense of decorum. Earthling Ed is a good example, and the Vegan Atheist is someone I'd recommend checking out. So yeah, some vegan advocates are not the best examples. Gary and Gaines, for instance, I don't fully appreciate their approach to the situation. Now, I get it. They're passionate, and so am I. But I also understand human psychology. Just because they're vegan doesn't mean I agree with all of their beliefs or actions. We're nearing the end here, just bear with me, I promise, I'm almost done. One of the last things Kyle said was, if I'm a hypocrite for loving bacon, call me a hypocrite. There's one thing I've heard Kyle discuss many times when talking about the mainstream media and partisan debates, where there's clearly a correct and incorrect answer on an issue. He calls it a neutrality bias. In these circumstances, you'd have people on two separate sides of an issue. Examples would be the atheism-theism debate, where one person, a creationist, is saying there is a God and he created the earth 6,000 years ago, and the other side says they need evidence to believe such grandiose assertions, and evolution is the proper notion and earth is over 4 billion years old. One will defend their side by using false claims and misinformation to support their narrative. The other will use statistics and data and historical records to provide a counter and prove some of the arguments the theist side made were false or based on misleading info. The host or moderator will then say, well, folks, what do you think about this? We're not going to take sides. And they do nothing to correct the record, like something that was falsely stated or even acknowledge a piece of crucial information an atheist stated to be true. They just let it all hang out there in the wind. Another example are the two parties here in America. A Republican or a corporate Democrat will say, Medicare for all is fascist and socialist and bad and wrong. And then Bernie or another progressive will say, it's good and it helps people and it's economically sound and it would end medical bankruptcy and help lift people out of poverty. In these circumstances, the media will only report and comment on what is said instead of the objective reality. Well, he said this and she said that, and we don't know. And in this situation, often their establishment bias will show, and they'll have some damn billionaire or health insurance CEO, on to give their whiny spiel. And of course, they're against it. They're against Medicare for all because it hurts their profit margin. But there are many institutional biases within educational, medical, business, financial, religious, government, and law fields that exude carnist predications. I'd like to read from this article I discovered on Routledge.com. We need to help our students understand that others may have different but also valuable perspectives based on a different set of experiences. Psychology today defines bias as a tendency, inclination, or prejudice toward or against something or someone, a cognitive shortcut. We all have this inclination. It was developed throughout our evolution as a way to protect us as we navigate the world. The definition goes on to read, some biases are positive and helpful, like choosing only to eat foods that are considered healthy or staying away from someone who has knowingly caused harm. But biases are often based on stereotypes, like rather than actual knowledge of an individual or circumstance. Whether positive or negative, such cognitive shortcuts can result in prejudgments that lead to rash decisions or discriminatory practices. It's this last bit that we lament in journalism, but to avoid prejudging, discriminating, or stereotyping, the solution is not to remove bias. Rather, it is to teach students how to recognize and acknowledge their biases and then seek out other perspectives. Journalists should absolutely report the facts as they exist, but this alone will not help audiences understand why the story is important and how it affects them. So if these biases exist everywhere and within places of authority, how are people going to discern good knowledge from an incorrect ideology? You shouldn't really rely on a doctor's opinion in nutrition or dieting, because doctors don't have to learn about nutrition to earn a license to practice medicine. If the doctor is educated in nutrition, then you should listen to them. But just because they're a doctor doesn't mean they have the best knowledge about dietary choices. In hospitals, they serve you Jell-O, which is essentially artificial fruit-flavored animal connective tissue, and meat and dairy. Unless you make it clear you are either vegan or lactose intolerant, it's just an assumption that no one is vegan until stated otherwise. Even though it's been scientifically proven that dairy contributes to bad cholesterol and brittle bone disease, hospitals will serve it to you willingly. And the dairy industry has interest in selling as much milk as they can. Because why? It's financially incentivized for them to do so. So my point is that more education about nutrition is vital to people making healthy decisions for themselves and their family. If people only rely on the words alone of dietitians and doctors to tell them eating fish is good and drinking milk is good, then people aren't really getting the full picture. Vegans are painted as crazy or dumb or malnourished because of a lack of information on the benefits of a plant-based diet coming from places of high esteem. Oftentimes you have people who are selling supplements or other things as a way to make financial gain, and they will paint eating any other way as a bad choice. An example would be someone like Dave Asprey, a multimillionaire who made a huge monetary gain from selling his bulletproof coffee regimen and adding tons of coconut oil into it, while claiming the China study lacks efficacy and isn't well-studied data. Why? He has a profit motive. But he's a whole other subject for another time. The main point is the dairy industry won't tell you drinking milk is bad, just like a health insurance CEO will say that Medicare for All is bad. Why? They both have something to gain. And they both have friends in high places, such as law and government, who will not inform the people because they too are in it for themselves. Which brings me to my final point, appealing to self-interest. We all care about people, other humans. I'd consider myself a humanist. As vegans, I can't speak for all vegans, but as liberals, as progressives, as people nominally on the left, and not just on the left, this goes across party lines. Some conservatives too. Even Kyle thinks, at our core, as human beings, there is an inherent goodness and willingness to help others. But we all have a stride of self-interest. What's in it for me if I go vegan? If I give a homeless person money, if I give someone a friend a ride, what's in it for me if I do this? We all get something out of stuff we want to do. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. The base function of pretty much all sentient creatures on Earth is to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Kyle is very pro-union and for boycotts and strikes when workers feel they are being mistreated at their place of employment. Kyle is pro-BDS because of Israel's treatment of Palestinian civilians and their apartheid of another country. I would believe that Kyle likes helping others or has a tendency to feel good if he helps other people in a material way. If Kyle wouldn't want to change his eating habits for non-human animals' benefit alone, I guess that's one thing. But let's come at it from a humanist perspective. Many meatpacking facilities have long abused their employees, and this isn't just me talking. This is an opinion piece from the LA Times. Meat and poultry companies are taking advantage of the American people not only by exploiting the prices of meat, but also by exploiting their employees who are forced to work in unsafe and unsanitary conditions that have become even worse amid the coronavirus pandemic. According to a recent Oxfam report, even before the pandemic hit, poultry workers found themselves under such pressure to keep up with breakneck processing speeds that many resorted to wearing diapers on the production line due to infrequent bathroom breaks. Is it any surprise that these companies failed to take sufficient safety measures to prevent their workers from contracting COVID-19? We as a society need to demand that meat and poultry companies protect innocent, hardworking people from falling ill and dying. We must also ask the government to do its job by not letting companies off the hook when their behavior is negligent and instead enforce the laws that require safe and healthy workplaces. There's another article from foodnavigator.com. Meat majors accused of exposing workers to abuse during coronavirus pandemic. From October 2020. WH Group, Tyson, JBS, and Hormel are among the businesses accused by the Know the Chain of exposing their workers to labor abuse amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Food Navigator asks the world's 4 biggest meat companies for their take on the report. According to the report published by Know the Chain, the world's 4 biggest meat companies are failing to take basic actions to protect workers in their supply chains. Know the Chain, a partnership between Humanity United, Business and Human Rights Resource Center, Sustain Analytics, and Verite, benchmarks current corporate practices to create resources for investors and companies. In its most recent benchmark report, which assessed the world's 43 largest food and beverage companies, Know the Chain said it exposed failures within these businesses that increased the risk of squalid conditions and outbreaks of COVID-19 seen in the meat industry this year. Specifically, Know the Chain ranked the 43 food and drink majors against the International Labor Organization's core standards, examining their policies and procedures to address supply chain forced labor. Companies were scored out of 100 against 21 indicators across 7 themes. These covered areas such as the extent to which businesses' buying practices incentivize good labor practices among suppliers, and their attempts to ensure supply chain workers are not exploited in the recruitment process. According to Know the Chain, the big four meat companies performed especially poor, with JBS and Tyson's approach having worsened in recent years. Whereas the average score overall was 28 out of 100, and Hormel both scored 12 out of 100, Tyson scored 9 out of 100, and WH Group scored just 1 out of 100. The report states that none of the big four meat processors disclosed any procedures for assessing new suppliers for forced labor risks before entering into contracts with them. None reported a process for responding to allegations of forced labor directed at their suppliers, and none reported supporting suppliers through its purchasing practices. For example, by making prompt payments, improving forecasting, or considering the costs of labor when agreeing price practices. Further, Know the Chain said that all 4 companies failed to disclose information on who in the company was responsible for implementing supply chain labor policies, and none reported engaging with supply chain workers' union or making any effort to support freedom of association in their supply chains. Tesco scored highest in the ranking, 65 out of 100, followed by Unilever, 60 out of 100, which Know the Chain noted had sped up payments to small suppliers through the pandemic and regularly engages with supply chain workers' unions. 3 out of the big 4 respond. Food Navigator reached out to Hormel Foods, JBS, Tyson, and WH Group to ask for their takes on the report. Responses were received from Hormel, JBS, and Tyson. JBS stressed, it aims only to partner with suppliers who share its values and mission to achieve a more sustainable food supply. In 2016, we established a 2020 supply chain goal that requires all of our suppliers to be compliant with our supplier code of conduct. JBS USA's head of corporate affairs, Cameron Brewitt, told its publication. Hormel, which owns a wide range of meat brands including Spam, Hormel Deli Meats, also owns some brands outside of the meat category, such as Skippy and Happy Little Plants. In response to Know the Chain's report, the company suggested that making more of its internal policies public in the future could yield different results. Ensuring human rights within our entire supply chain is extremely important to us, and we are committed to continually advancing our efforts. As benchmark reports are often only based on publicly available information, we are committed to sharing more information about our policies and efforts in this area in the future, and are confident that it will enhance our rating. Contrary to the implications of Know the Chain's report, meat processor Tyson told Food Navigator the health and safety of its workers are its top priority. We've implemented a host of protective measures at our facilities that meet or exceed CDC and OSHA guidance for preventing COVID-19, we were told. Indeed, the company has taken wide-reaching measures designated to protect its facilities from potential outbreaks. Tyson has transformed its sites with protective measures, conducts wellness health screening for all team members each time they turn up to work, and has purchased more than 15 infrared walkthrough temperature scanners to help detect signs of illness. But is all that really enough? Here's another article from August of 2021. For decades, the industry has recruited immigrants and refugees to perform the dangerous job of cutting America's meat. Now, a small but growing number of plants are employing visa workers. Colored hard hats distinguish different roles and jobs at Seaboard Foods, a major meat packing plant in Guaymas, Oklahoma. I don't know how to say that. Guyman, Oklahoma. Guyman, Oklahoma. Senior management have green, supervisors wear dark blue, foreign workers on visas don yellow-green, but Seaboard is part of a small but growing trend in the meatpacking industry, which already largely relied on an immigrant workforce. More foreigners are being hired to perform the dangerous job of cutting and packaging America's meat. In 2015, 6 plants requested to hire foreign workers. Last year, the number almost doubled to 11, according to an Investigate Midwest analysis of U.S. Department of Labor data. Each year since 2017, Seaboard has employed at least 100 workers on H-2B visas. Under the federal program, businesses can hire foreigners for temporary jobs when faced with labor shortages. Most visa workers work as landscapers, maids, and cooks. Industry experts said foreign workers whose time in the States is tied to the employer sponsoring their visas and generally aren't members of plants' unions are probably less likely to speak out about working conditions in an industry where lacerations and amputations are common. Plants need to employ a lot of people, and you have to push them as hard as possible, said Joshua Specht, a professor at the University of Notre Dame who has studied the meat industry. The best way to do that, obviously, is to focus on employing people who are rather marginal and who are willing to put up with being overworked. The North American Meat Institute, Meatpacking's lobbying arm that often speaks for the industry, did not respond to multiple requests for comment over several weeks about the increased use of H-2B visas or criticisms of plant safety. The Department of Labor approves applications for H-2B visa labor and ensures the visa workers' rights. The department takes very seriously violations of H-2B program requirements and strives to protect the wages, working conditions, and safety of all workers, especially during these difficult and challenging times, agency spokesman Grant Vaught said in a statement. And here you can see this graphic. It shows the incline of places with the H-2B visa employees over the last few years. Martin Rosas, the president of United Food and Commercial Workers Local 2 that represents workers at Seaboard, said workers are conditioned not to complain because they have to go through the rehiring process each year. The company gives them a different color of hat, he said. That alone makes them a target by the supervisor, by anyone who wants to mistreat workers. Employing H-2B workers from October through June allows the company to keep up with high demand, and it treats every employee equally. A Seaboard Foods spokesman said, all receive a starting wage of $17 to $25 an hour, paid holidays, and health insurance, he said. The H-2B participants are treated exactly the same as full-time production workers, he said. Because more than 1,000 employees are on the production floor during a shift, different hat colors allow workers and supervisors to easily identify each other. To qualify as an H-2B employer, a company must pay a wage equal to or above the industry's prevailing wage or the area's minimum wage, but across all industries, H-2B workers are often paid less than U.S. workers, according to the progressive think tank Economic Policy Institute. Another requirement for a company hiring H-2B visa labor is to show a shortage of available workers. However, according to an EPI report, the U.S. economy shows no sign of labor shortages in the industries that often use H-2B visas. DOL data in the report shows about 5 million unemployed workers in occupations with H-2B approvals. One criticism of the program is that positions can become semi-permanent because companies request extensions. It really has become a way to replace labor in the United States for cheap jobs, said Victoria Mesa, a civil rights attorney with the Immigrant Justice Project at Southern Poverty Law Center. The situation where a person's time in the country, and so their ability to make a paycheck, is tied to their employer is similar to the H-2B's agricultural counterpart, the H-2A visa. Workers often endure abuse and exploitation because they don't want to be deported. Centro de los Deseos del Inmigrante, Incorporated, I hope I pronounced that right, an organization that helps to improve the working conditions of Mexico-based migrant workers in the U.S., interviewed 100 workers on H-2A visas and concluded that all had their rights violated. Many find that when they arrive in the U.S., conditions are far different from those promised, reads the organization's 2020 report. Even workers who described a generally positive experience with their employer labored in a workplace with at least one serious legal violation. Angela Stuess, anthropology professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, said the meatpacking industry allows workers to endure repetitive labor that leads to injuries. People are standing on the line, shoulder to shoulder, with people on either side of them, and they're making the same cut over and over and over. It's a hostile environment. You're not expected to get sick. You're not expected to get injured. Meatpacking plant employees often deal with high rates of illness and severe injuries. Meat and poultry workers experience about 160 cases per 10,000 employees, in 2013, compared to about 40 cases for manufacturing overall, according to a 2016 U.S. Government Accountability Office report. The injury rate decreased between 2004 and 2013, but it was still higher than manufacturing overall. Both of those rates are likely higher because workers and employees may underreport injuries and illnesses, according to the report. Specht, the industry historian, said the meatpacking industry has a long history of worker exploitation. The article continues into further detail, and of course I'll link it below. I remember watching one documentary, I can't remember which one it might have been, Cowspiracy, but there was some meatpacking plant in rural Kentucky or wherever, and they used undocumented immigrant workers, and the company made a deal with customs enforcement that every once in a while they'd come take a number of their undocumented workers and deport them, and the meatpacking plant was like, all right. And workers who had issues or concerns or complained about a lack of benefits, they just sick ICE agents on them, send them to their homes to harass them as an intimidation tactic. It was purely disgusting to learn about this happening, and it should make everyone angry, especially someone like Kyle Kulinski. I wanted to jump over to this one last article because I think it really encapsulated the corruption. From just last month, December 2021, meatpackers prioritize profits over worker safety during the pandemic. A new bill would force them to change. A new bill jointly released last week by Senator Cory Booker and Representative Ro Khanna seeks to address an injustice laid bare by the coronavirus pandemic. The gaping power differential between the people who process the U.S. meat supply and the executives and shareholders who often profit from their labor. It would do so by protecting meatpacking workers from repetitive stress injuries, which have become endemic to the occupation. The legislation would also likely bolster worker safety during future viral outbreaks. In an important sense, the COVID-19 era has been a tale of two pandemics, one for people whose jobs require them to toil indoors at close quarters, and another for those who make a living without facing such hazards. Few industries sum up the situation more neatly than meatpacking. An October 27th report from the U.S. House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus crisis found that in plants run by the five biggest U.S. meatpacking firms, JBS, Tyson, Smithfield, Cargill, and National Beef Packing Company, at least 59,000 workers tested positive for the virus during the first year of the pandemic, and at least 269 died. At several individual plants run by these multinational conglomerates, upward of 44% of the workforce tested positive in that period. The full extent of coronavirus infections and deaths in these meatpacking companies was likely much worse than these figures suggest because of incomplete data, the report added. It concluded, instead of addressing the clear indications that workers were contracting the coronavirus at alarming rates due to conditions in meatpacking facilities, Companies prioritize profits and production over worker safety, continuing to employ practices that led to crowded facilities in which the virus spread easily. The outbreak spilled into surrounding communities as meatpacking plants emerged as prime vectors for spreading the virus into rural America. A May 2021 U.S. Department of Agriculture report told the story in one grim chart, comparing COVID cases in meatpacking extensive rural counties to their non-meatpacking heavy peers. For the industry's executives and shareholders, the crisis brought opportunity. The conglomerates that dominate the trade successfully lobbied against emergency rules to protect their workers and pushed to speed up their lines, making it even more difficult to maintain social distance on the shop floor. For their trouble, these companies brought home record profits during the pandemic. A September 2021 report, from the National Economic Council found the power imbalance between capital and labor in meatpacking long predates the pandemic. These days, just 4 giant companies slaughter and pack more than half of the beef, cattle, hogs, and chicken grown in the United States. As the company has consolidated into fewer and bigger conglomerates, the workforce, largely made up of people of color, many of whom are immigrants, faced ever harsher conditions, even as their real wages deteriorated. A 2016 Oxfam report found that in poultry plants, workers were forced to work so rapidly and relentlessly that they were routinely denied bathroom breaks and sometimes resorted to wearing diapers. Oxfam added, the supervisors mock their needs and ignore their requests. They threaten punishment or firing. Workers wait inordinately long times, an hour or more, then race to accomplish the tasks within a certain time frame, 10 minutes, or risk of discipline. In the 1990s, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration attempted to roll out rules designed to protect workers from repetitive stress injuries. As I showed in a piece last year, management side labor lawyer Eugene Scalia, whose father then served on the Supreme Court, led a lobbying push in 2001, crushed the protective rules known as an ergonomic standard. Scalia served as Secretary of the Labor Department, which oversees OSHA under President Donald Trump. So this is a systemic problem, and I'll link a few more articles that I think are pertinent to the conversation. But as you can tell, this is a real problem and has been happening for a long time. So I find it interesting, if Kyle is pro boycotts and believes in them, that he wouldn't want to stop purchasing meat because he doesn't want to provide money to companies he feels are mistreating other human beings, because he doesn't want to contribute to that culture of abuse. Honestly, I don't even know how much Kyle understands of the abuse that goes on in the meat industry to the employees. I think he knows a fair amount. I genuinely believe Kyle is unaware of how gross it actually is, though, and how horrid the conditions employees at meat factories work under. But I'm sure if he learned of all of it, he wouldn't really be that surprised, though. But is knowing that and understanding it even enough to abstain from buying meat? You as a consumer can vote with your dollars to place pressure on companies to change, and I think people often underestimate the power they have as consumers. But even all that said, is that appealing enough to the self-interest of someone like Kyle? What's in it for me if poor working conditions are not motivating enough? Is it climate change? I've already gone over the terrible exacerbation animal agriculture places on the environment. Is it in Kyle's interest to abstain from meat or dairy, or both, and eggs too, in order to help lower the impact he as a consumer has on the climate? We always talk about climate change in a serious way, but how many liberals or progressives, or even some moderates, are vegan? Is harming the environment enough to keep the younger generation or anybody away from food practices that harm the planet, if not the animals? If you grow a garden, you're doing more to help the planet than you would growing millions of head of livestock. So isn't it in your self-interest to change your food behaviors based on the climate alone? And if it's not, then what is? Is it in your self-interest to change if you understand your health is at risk? I've gone over a lot of information already, yet there is still much I have left out on that. And you're more than free to go look it up yourself and learn the toll that it has on your body and your mind. If you care more about quality of life over quantity, then a proper vegan diet will still give you a vast quality of life, plus quantity, more than the consumption of animal products will. I'm not here to tell people what to do, but there are consequences to everything that we do, and that includes what we eat and put in our bodies. Consequences of that fall not just on ourselves, but on the environment and other people. Is it in your self-interest to lower your risk of cancer, lower your risk of high cholesterol and heart disease and blood clots and osteoporosis and so many other ailments that eating animal products contributes to? Is it in your self-interest to be dietarily healthy? Yes, I think it is. It objectively is. But people don't always do what is healthier. I drink alcohol, but I know it's not healthy for me. I love eating chocolate and potato chips, but I know that's not healthy for me. I vape for the effect nicotine has, but I know that's not healthy for me either. I think it has more to do with convenience and ignorance and an unwillingness to change based on fear. And when I say fear, I really mean fear. It's quite honestly scary and sometimes traumatic for people to change such an enormous part of their day-to-day lifestyle. Something they've been used to for a huge part of their life. And sometimes eating healthy isn't always cheap. It can get expensive, which is sad for people with tight budgets and not enough time on their hands to cook hearty, at-home vegan meals, let alone non-vegan meals. People can be busy, and if they're busy working all the time and they just want to come home and relax, it's cheaper and more convenient for people to go buy fast non-vegan food than it is to buy fast vegan food. I think the most logical first step is moderation. You don't have to change everything about your day-to-day in 24 hours. But little steps here and there can go a long way. I just hope one day Kyle recognizes the inherent value of becoming vegan and at least tries some changes here and there that will not only benefit animals and the environment, but also him. I care about Kyle and I want him to be healthy. I want him to live a long time and have the best quality of life possible. I want Kyle to entertain me with political commentary and fart jokes for years and years to come. Because I like him. I care about him. I spent what feels like a year writing this script and about an hour talking, and my throat's getting dry. And even if Kyle doesn't see this or hear this, I hope other people do and gain something from it. I like helping people, and what better way to help people than to try and educate them on healthy practices? So yeah, that's about it. I'm done here. Subscribe if you like if you like. Hit the bell if you want to see more of what I have to offer in the future. This video was a big undertaking because I had to look up a lot of information on this to drive the points home, and again, everything is in the description that I used. It got tiring at times, yeah, but this was fulfilling, and it took a fucking billion years to get my goddamn camera to start working properly and record this shit because it's like the damn audio gets out of sync. Anyway, have a great day, people out there.